As a kid, I've never been a huge fan of graphic novels, but at the time I just known them to be comic books. The closest thing to comic books is absolutely Super Strikers, Soccer Warriors, and remember the small section in the Isolezwe where there's a 4 block comic? Yeah, that was it, but did eventually read superhero comic books. One was a Superman comic, I don't know which version of it, and there's clearly another one which was the Ultimate Spider-Man comic, and I still don't remember the issue for both of them, to be honest, to this day. I genuinely did enjoy reading them, but realized that I just love reading books way more. Reading books was my main entertainment, even though how did I get into reading with ADHD is a total mystery to me. I think it was around the summer of December 2019 when my big bro recommended Webtoon and started reading, but not so immediately. I mean, I did read a bit. It was mostly 3 episodes of Low Olympus, but at that time I discovered Low Olympus on Quora and read a blog post of someone explaining to someone else the original myth behind the story. And yeah, I used to be a Quora kid. You could guess what happened in 2020. No, I didn't immediately start reading until about a month into April when lockdown will be extended that I started not only to read Webtoon but actually discovered the GOAT that recently passed, Tachiyomi. Reading comics, especially on Webtoon, was unique as he had a stunning template called Vertical Scroll. Vertical Scroll comics are an endless strip of digital comics that are scrolled up and down with a single motion, usually using a thumb or a finger. I personally fell in love with this design and immediately started to read not only Low Olympus and Tower of God. Yeah, that was it. Like I said, I wasn't a huge comic fan, so I limited my sample pool, and even by that time started off reading manga. Another is that I was already a huge bookworm who was into modern classic literature and few YA novels, but I was also slowly getting into classic literature, usually starting with children's books, eventually into your typical classics. So it was difficult to read any comic, especially the slop kind that actually ended up swallowing the entire Webtoon catalog, but that is not my fight. Currently, it's been 7 years since I've been reading all types of graphic novels, manhwa, manga, comic books, superhero comic books, indie comics, and DC Vertigo. I'm not an expert, but I'm better than your dad who just has a collection of every Fantastic Four issue and swears to love Akira. Today, I want to analyze the mini evolution of the distinct flavors of Vertical Scroll comics, as there's actually some effort when making these comics than I actually thought. I personally am not a comic artist, as you can tell from drawings, and attempted to only an absolute failure. My analysis may suck, so if you're a publisher or an artist, you can chip in below the comment section. Where to start? I might start with the fact that Vertical Scroll comics may actually seem as a Korean invention, which was my first thought, but on further research points to Scott McCloud, who actually introduced the concept of infinite canvas in his 2000s book, Reinventing Comics. It means some programmers and comic artists in Korea may have picked up the book and read about the concept only to execute it later on. It was honestly the perfect time, as since 1998, the comic industry in Korea was struggling due to rising economic struggles, the unbanning of manga that led to a bigger competition. So Scott McCloud released the book at a time when comic artists needed a dire alternative with the rise of websites. Talking about perfect timing. The vertical comics were coined as webcomics due to Sheolian, South Korea's search engine, with most websites being personal websites self-hosted by artists. I actually tried to search for the so-called first vertical scroll comics, but found nothing but names of artists who were the first to post their comics online in the early 2000s. Some of them were just popular titles such as Love Story, Apartments, and Sound of Heart. Actually, luckily, one of the giants from that group actually did release the earliest version of a vertical scroll I will use, and it is called The Sound of Your Heart. We are going to skip the narrative and the synopsis with the focus on its paneling, and it's pretty simple. In the comic, it uses basic rectangular frames that encompasses the screen, sometimes touching the width of the screen or remaining within the white space with some space left between the screen. Sometimes the artist would draw borderless frames. This style is still used, as if you look at Luxem, it's really similar to a framing device. It uses a really similar framing device. The difference seems to be the fact that Luxem embraces borderless and smaller rectangular frames. The Sound of Heart along the way simplifies with just rectangular frames hugging the width of the smartphone. Some may see this as a sign of probably laziness or productiveness, as the artist might be quickly pumping out his comics with ease. But I think there's something in the subtle style that I call the vertical strip. Get it? It's like a vertical strip scroll combined with comic strip. You can tell from the style and the length of the Sound of Heart that it is a comic strip drawn in vertical scroll due to its fancy, unique comic framing style. Wouldn't work with the medium that focuses on the slice of life storytelling and humor. Same with Luxem, as a modern day slopgangism fan. Luxem was a slice of life romance comedy that focused on unfair beauty standards with a sci-fi subplot. Luxem was a mix of episodic and serialized storytelling, with most of its early work having its focus on a lot of jokes and slice of life moments. So the vertical strip paneling style worked for its story, as it allowed it to focus on the narrative and deliver jokes. I mean, there's more to the success of Luxem, as its combination of genres with strong character writing made it such a juggernaut in the late 2017 to early 2022 era. As the comic became more popular and priorities shifted, the paneling style also shifted what I consider the modern vertical scroll paneling. I would use 2013's Dice as an example, as it truly captures a moment in time when vertical scroll comics became self-aware and started imitating traditional comic paneling. In Dice, we see pretty nice paneling consisting of not only rectangular shapes, but also rectangular shapes bunched into groups of 3 or 4, but mostly 3s in various proportions. Even see irregular rectangular shapes with slanted side and some pairs of frames placed side by side but not aligned horizontally. I personally love this style, as it is the best of both worlds. While the original vertical strip was solid, it lacked any dynamic flow that allowed action to be conveyed across, but only vertically, but horizontally and diagonally. It's an essential and important tool that makes a good graphic novel that many people don't consider. No matter how good your art is, bad paneling and reading flow will ruin the experience for potential fans and publishers. There's also another added element that should be considered, which becomes a prominent characteristic in the neo-modern vertical scroll paneling: wide screen frames. These types were rare early on, but became more used and popular as vertical scroll comics became more used, with artists developing an intuitive understanding of its properties. The widescreen frames will need to be discussed soon, but we need to talk about neo-modern vertical scroll paneling. The neo-modern vertical scroll paneling is something else will happen in real time, not only binge reading Luxem catching up in 2021, but seeing Lore Olympus bring a sense of this shift. Lord Olympus is not only popular as one of the faces of romance or fantasy, but an example that the genre didn't have trashy pornographic slop that actually is what the series ended up turning into eventually. Lord Olympus has amazing paneling that made the series easier to read. Its rectangular frames were bigger with faces. Its rectangular frames were bigger with faces filling your screen with wide screen frames that became the only visual on your screen mid-scroll was something entirely new to experience of reading webcomics. Lord Olympus utilized the white space as a tool for storytelling, allowing the story to breathe on the digital screens. The use of borderless frames also added to its visual storytelling as its colors would contain itself and sometimes bleed into the white canvas, destroying its borders between frames, becoming a seamless journey in imitation of a grand painting. Yes, there's a lot of elements that made Lord Olympus popular, considering its simple, beautiful art style, which is purely aesthetic in its look than in its execution through its proportional drawings and other elements that are not as considered, but fused with traditional watercolor painting passed through a veil of texture filter is something so tasteful and webtoon in most styles, with the typical Asian drawing style and rendering techniques that have been established. Yes, the proportions and line art could have been better, but it's comics and good art has never been its strength. In that consideration, Lord Olympus became such a hallmark of what Webtoon was supposed to become, or we thought would become. A new frontier for not only storytelling, art, and access for younger generations. Accessibility has been achieved without the other two core elements in consideration because this neo-modern vertical scroll pushed by Lord Olympus became flat over time. When reading a new series like the recently ended The Greatest Estate Developer, other artists, especially from Korea, took notice and started to develop more of wider, longer vertical frames that encompasses the screen, with less traditional comic paneling and leaning into the vertical strip methods that had tall frames with widths going past the screen. The panels not only contained the screen bled off the screen horizontally but bled vertically. But the problem is that the current neo style feels more safer and less ambitious than Lord Olympus that blurred the lines between the white canvas and the actual contents on the screen. Most are drawn to fill the space but never created the same amazing parallax illusions created in Lord Olympus. Even Lord Olympus actually lost its dynamic paneling. Over time, people realized how bad the art for Lord Olympus gotten, even though Lord Olympus art has never been traditionally amazing. Its strongest strength was its stylized, simple visuals mixed with its amazing paneling. I even remember someone saying that Lord Olympus had strong paneling but became boring with safe frames, which is true. The comic basically became more standardized with simple vertical strip layouts and copy-paste poses. My theory is over time, making a comic weekly is very demanding, so simplifying the comic paneling was a better option in publishing. I have to say that Webtoon has entered the publishing landscape, and I believe that adapting vertical scroll to print is not as easy, so having simple panels can have a difference in the world. There's really not much to add or discuss about vertical comics, but the comics themselves. I'll soon consider making a few video essays. Some of these mentioned above will get an essay, especially Dice. I'm actually close to being done reading season 3, and I will come out with it soon. Other than that, Lord Olympus, well, I might write about it soon, but it'll probably be less about the comic and more about the controversies around the comic and what I think about it. Other than that, I say thanks for watching my video, and I hope you go to Steam and wish this College World, which is a game I'm developing, and thank you for watching. So yeah, bye.